Lastly, we'll finish up with a bunch of just CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. And the delete will actually go through adding an aspect, sys temporary, and show how that works. And then when we delete the objects, they'll just go away. They won't go to the trash can. I want to mention just for a minute, talk a little bit about where what company I come from. Who is Bluefish? We're done right the first time. So it's a pleasure. It stands for Content Management Interoperability Services. It's a lot of words, so we're just going to call it CMIS. And it provides a specification for talking to enterprise content management systems. The spec is basically maintained by Oasis. And at the end of the slides, I provide a couple of URLs if you want to go look up those things and have access to them. So a little bit, I don't want to give you guys a hard sell on using CMIS, but a little bit of the reasoning that I use for why I enjoy coding with CMIS. I mean, it provides a standardized way to talk to an ACM system. I mean, much like you expect SQL queries to be able to go against different databases, when you're speaking CMIS, you expect it to work against other CMIS compliant repositories. And there are a variety of vendors that support CMIS now: Alfresco in the cloud, FileNet, SharePoint, Documentum, and OpenText. Also, you can save development time by reusing code. You're building standalone applications, basically. And a lot of times you can leverage that code and reuse it more easily than you could if it was sort of deployed into an individual client solution. And you can also access the cloud. So I kind of do a side-by-side of writing a standalone application versus writing a packaged AMP and deploying it. Obviously, with the nice thing about CMIS, if Python is your favorite language ever, you can write everything in Python, talk to Alfresco. You don't have to write in JavaScript. You can point at a bunch of different repositories. Now today, for my examples today, everything talks to Alfresco, and it all talks to the same version of Alfresco, and so life is good and easy. But if you're ever writing a custom application that needs to talk to multiple CMIS compliant repositories, then obviously it's a huge win to be able to write code that you can point at different repos without having to make a huge amount of changes. Obviously, when you're writing code into an AMP, you're tied to kind of a deployment cycle, Alfresco restart. Your code is in Alfresco. That may not be a big deal, but there have been times when we've written custom code using a little standalone CMIS app where we just wanted to do like a one-off hit against some content in the repository, manipulate that content, and be kind of one and done. It was just a one-time operation. And we didn't really want that code to live forever on in the code base. And it was really easy to write a standalone little app that would call out to Alfresco and make the manipulations. And then we were basically done, and we could store that code off, and it would be outside the Alfresco environment. So with that stated, let's talk about Apache Chemistry. It's a project within the Apache Software Foundation. I provided the link there. They provide sort of a reference implementation for a bunch of different languages. My dream when I started this talk, I was like, oh man, I'm going to come in and I'm going to provide Java, Python, PHP, .NET, Objective-C examples, and it's going to be awesome, and it's going to take like 4 days to get through all this. And you guys would be asleep because I'd be doing the same thing over and over and over again. But they do support this. Most of our stuff today is going to be in Java. I do provide a Python example at the end. But they do have other platform support. They also provide development tools and an in-memory server as well. You can actually stand up their little in-memory server and talk to it via CMIS. The development tool that I think most people use that work with CMIS is CMIS Workbench. And that's, even if you're not doing CMIS development, it's a nice tool to have just on your system to be able to do queries against the back-end repository. So let's talk about my environment on my laptop here. And I'm using the latest release of Alfresco Enterprise, 4.2.3.1. My Java examples, I'm using Eclipse Kepler as my Eclipse environment, Maven 3.02, Java 1.7. And then for Python, I'm using 2.7. CMISlib needs 2.7, 6 or 7, I think. Apache Chemistry version 0.12, which is the latest. The Python libraries are using the CMIS 1.0. But the Open CMIS for Java, you can speak CMIS 1.1. I'm using that. So we'll start with Java examples, and then I'll show a Python example, which sort of wraps up a bunch of stuff we do for Java. So this is kind of the order of operations for this. When I say build the environment, I'm basically just showing you the dependency you need to add to your Maven POM. We're not going to go through setting up Eclipse and everything. We don't have the bandwidth for that today, unfortunately. But once you get the dependency set up in Maven and you're ready to go and import into Eclipse, you're ready to go. The first thing we'll do is just demonstrate getting a session. The session is the basic, kind of the root of connecting to the repository with CMIS. The session is basically tied to a user. Once you have a session, we'll get some content nodes, and start doing stuff with the repository. The first example is a read operation. We do a query, and then we export to a CSV file, sort of like a report, I guess. Real simplistic, but it provides an example. If you needed to pull a bunch of metadata off of a query in documents and wanted to write it out to a spreadsheet, you can do that. It's pretty straightforward. Following that, we'll do some update examples. Another example, I wanted to have an example with a content stream, and kind of one I thought of was I have my hipster Ipsum PDF files. Please use hipster Ipsum if you have never seen it. Lorem Ipsum is obsolete now. It's really good stuff. Anyway, so we're going to stream that content to the PDF box. And PDF box one of the things it can do is give you a page count. And so we'll get page counts, and then we'll actually write back to the repo with setting that. And so you kind of see a cycle of reading and updating nodes, and all those examples are specific to this one thing, but this is a kind of pattern you would reuse over and over again. And then there's sort of really what I would call like a grab bag of CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete nodes and folders. The last example, when I do a delete, I decided it would be good to show adding an aspect with the 1.1 libraries. So we actually add the sys temporary aspect, so when we delete, they're gone forever and ever. They don't go to the trash can. And then once that's done, you will have a pretty good set of files where you could go in and just play with the code and start working on your own applications. So the first thing really is just adding a dependency to your Maven POM. The client implementation from Chemistry, I don't know if that's even, I guess it is. It's 0.12 version. So this, and when you, if you download the code that I have, there's several other dependencies because I'm using PDF Box and I'm using OpenCSV. But this is the main one you need to work with the client library. And again, this will be in a code example that you can download. And then you just follow the standard pattern of importing and setting up Maven project in Eclipse. I'll show you real quick, actually, before we move on. I kind of struggle with the best way. Can we? And we can't see. Okay. The way I built this code, I was kind of struggling with like how I wanted to provide code samples, because so what I decided was, well, I'm just going to make a test client, and it's going to be responsible. It'll have the main method, and it'll be responsible for just calling different example code. I wanted to encapsulate the examples easily, so you didn't have one gigantic thing of code that you were looking through. So each example is tied back to a different Java class. And so there's just a static method that gets called for each example. To run it, I'm just going to, you can call it with a command line parameter, example 1, 2, 3, 4, 4A, 4B, basically, and that's it. And that calls a helper method that calls my classes. And so it's pretty easy. If you download this, it should be pretty easy to see kind of how things are working. If you run it from the command line, you just need to provide a command line argument with the example that you want to run. It doesn't run everything if you don't provide it with an example, but we could add that to the switch if we wanted to. So that's kind of our dev world. So let's get started with creating a session. And we're going to be using Java for this example. There's 3 types of bindings that you can use. I'm using AtomPub here, but web services is supported. There's also browser bindings, which are really for JavaScript bindings. I haven't really played with that, but it is part of CMIS 1.1. It's supposed to make life a lot easier for calling CMIS through JavaScript. So it'll be fun to try out, but I haven't had a chance to work with it yet. So everything we're doing is AtomPub. And the nice thing, I tell you what the binding we're using is, but it doesn't really matter once we get the session, because it's basically abstracted out by the client classes. You're going to get a session and just start working with the session, and it won't matter once you won't care about that once it's set up. I wanted to provide this slide. I think there's some confusion, or there can be confusion around what binding URL should be used. For 1.0, it's Alfresco 4.0 and 4.1. The top one is used. And then for 4.2, you have a choice. You can bind to 1.0 or 1.1 CMIS. Now, we're using this one today. There's some updates, some new stuff in 1.1 that I need. So actually, to use my code, you will need an Alfresco 4.2 repository. Or you can bind to 1.0 and make a few changes in some of the aspect handling work that I do. So I mentioned before, a session is tied to a user. When you create a session, you pass it. You basically set the URL of the repository, the binding method, and the username and password that you want to use, and then you have your session object. There is caching on this for performance. It's really beyond the scope of what I can cover in today's 40-minute session, but there is caching there for performance. Everything you see today is hard-coded, right? My login, and I made a little factory that just uses admin and a URL. It's all hard-coded. But in the real world, obviously, you'd inject values or pass them in dynamically or whatever. But for examples, I think it makes it pretty straightforward to see what I'm doing. And again, we're using the 1.1 binding. So I'll show you this in Eclipse in just a minute. But I've created sort of my own session factory. But if you look at the top line there, the session factory class is part of the OpenCMIS client implementation. And you can just basically get an instance of that. And then you need to pass it a set of parameters in a string map. User, password, the binding type, and the repo ID, all those things. Now, I made my own factory so I could hard code these values and just get my session back with my user and URL hard coded in there. So all my examples basically call this little helper class to get the session back and then start doing work. So let's, once you get a session, you might want to know what your repository can do. Now, again, we're just working against Alfresco 4.2 here, right? I know, if I looked at all the capabilities one time, it'll be the same every time. But let's say you're connecting to different repository types, different CMIS that support CMIS. You might want to know, like, what version is it? What product is it? What are its capabilities? And so, just as part of this first example, once I get the session back, I just return repository info. There's a repository info class and repository capabilities class, and you can actually use those to get a listing of all the abilities of the back-end repository. So I demonstrate that. This is something that could be really useful, again, if you're connecting to multiple repos, or if you just want to display the current Alfresco version. So I'll show you that in just a second. This is actually the CMIS session factory is my class that I wrote, and again, it cheats and it hard codes all the login data, and so I just get a session back. Once I have the session. And by the way, the reason all this is being spell checked, I can't run in presentation mode because we have some weird projector issues. So I apologize for the weird red underlining. Once I get the session back, I get the repository info, and then I just dump the whole string to the console for capabilities and for the information. So let's jump over there and do that real quick. So again, I'm running on a local repository, so that was really fast. But you can see here, Alfresco Enterprise version 4231. I'm sorry, it's kind of low on the screen. And then I have a giant string, of all the capabilities in the repository. This may not be that meaningful right now, but down the line when you're working with a repository, you can actually get different key value pairs from there to see what your backend repository can do. So that was a pretty simple example. This is my actual class for this. And as I mentioned, I hard-coded, I have static values. I put commented out versions of the other URL just for reference. But basically, I've passed in admin, and then using Atom pub binding. So let's jump back. So example 2 is a little more complicated. We got our session now, right? So we can actually talk to the repository. So let's go, we want to do something with that. We found out what the repository can do. We saw what version it was, what type it was Alfresco. We basically want this metadata export example to demonstrate a query, getting data and utilizing it. And it was hard. I was like, what's a good example? And we actually had, we did have a client that said, hey, I want, for a given set of nodes, I want all this exported to a spreadsheet, basically. I was like, oh, that's a pretty easy example to implement, and maybe something you might do in the real world. So I provided a simple example of that. We're also introducing CMIS queries behind to this, because the way we're going to get our objects is through a CMIS query. So let's jump to the next one. The syntax of a CMIS query should be familiar. It's SQL-esque, basically. The select and from are required. There's a where statement, and order by are optional. This is the massive global select, get everything from all documents in the repo query, but it's the base example. But then you can actually constrain on different fields as needed. And I'll show you in my example in a minute. I'm querying by creation time range, like after a certain date and before a certain date. The result that you get back from a query basically implements the iterable interface, so you can walk the result set pretty easily. We pass those key value pairs for the metadata properties to OpenCSV, and it just writes out a CSV file. Query results, if you need to act on a document from a query result, there's not like a direct map between query result and CMIS object. So you can actually create an object with the ID if you need to, a document. The other way to go about that, and I show this elsewhere in the code, I use this method, is to use query objects, and you can get back something that you can cast to a document directly and set properties on it. In my code, I have a couple of commented out sections, if you want to look at it later, where you can just swap code and try it both ways, and it should work either way. So my query here, and I'm being a better citizen here, and I'm only selecting fields that I actually want, rather than doing a select star. So you can reduce greatly the amount of data you're passing back by just saying, well, I really just want the name. I don't want to pass back select star. So I'm doing that here. Later on, I have an example where I'm doing a select star, but don't pay attention to that one. This is the one you want to look at. So I'm just getting back the name, creation date, last modification date, created by, and last modified by. Those are the fields I want to write to my report, my CSV file. Then I have like a templatized query. I'm replacing the %s with timestamps, ISO 8601 dates. And then the way OpenCSV wants data is you just add a set of values to a string array. And notice it's get property by value by query name. My names are the same. Like my CMIS name, I didn't alias it or anything, but you could. There's not really a reason to in this simple query. So let's go do that example. So, okay, are we off the screen? Better? Yep. All right, so here's my nice hard-coded path. I warned you about hard-coded things, but that's there. You can change that as needed for my file. Basically, the query is here. I'll output that to the console when I run it. And you get back an item iterable of query result set. And then I just walk the result set and add the values. I'm passing in like a Gregorian calendar value for the date time. So, and then we just write it out to basically write it out to a file. But this is a good example of operating on a set of nodes and reading data off of them, adding them, and using them in some other way. So let's just run this guy. And again, that was super fast, right? My production quality laptop here. You can see we found 11 items. And this is my actual query. The timestamp range. And then on my file system, I should have everything I've put out. Now, all of these things are type CMIS document. I didn't constrain further because I'm following my own rules of, I'm going to use, I could have done better ways to, constrain my query, but this gives you 11 results. And it's just a date range query. Can you actually, you can sort of see that, huh? But it's the CM name, the creator modifier, creation and modification dates. So our next example is similar, but I wanted to demonstrate, I want to provide a couple of examples, and PDF box is not misspelled, but I want to provide a couple of examples of content streams. This is one where we're reading a content stream, and we're actually going to pass it to PDF box. It's going to give us a document count, and I'm going to take that and write it to a piece of metadata. Now, to follow my rules, I'm writing it to CM description because that's in the base set of, you don't have to change any models for that. So So we'll retrieve the documents. We'll generate the page count, and we'll write it back to Alfresco. Again, we're going to use CMIS document for this. We do a little check for MIME type. I mean, I know what I'm passing to my code because I've made the data set. But just in case you try to sneak a Word doc in or something, we're gonna check for MIME type, and then we'll set it in CM description. The query, this is where I should have actually been more specific in my select. I just bad citizen on that one. But you can see I wanted to demonstrate the like predicate. You can see it right here. I'm looking for stuff. It's hard to read, but it's wildcarded with %. So with ipsum, with anything before or after it. So my hipster ipsum will match those. There's 4 of those, and we should get page counts on all those. This is my result set, the result callback. I'm actually setting like get page. My max items is like 20, but we're getting like 4 things back. So I'm not really demonstrating paging at all in this demonstration today, but just wanted to show what that would look like if you called it. Once we get the query result, I walk the nodes, basically walk the results. We generate a properties hash map of strings, and then try to read the ID. We get a document from that ID down here, from using the session to get an object with the ID. If it isn't null, then we'll set the values and then set description. So let me show you that. Oh, before I do that, though, I should show you just to make sure that nothing up my sleeve, right? So you can see none of these have descriptions. That's a lot of output, but you can see we're getting page counts here. One interesting thing here, we're getting the object ID with a version number. We're going to see this later, but when you get an object reference like this in your code, if you're doing updates, you're going to want to call like get latest version because the object ID is referring to a certain version, and you want to make sure you're not stale. You'll get an error actually if you try to update. It'll throw back an error that you're not on the latest version of the document. But in my code later when we do updates, I demonstrate that. But you can see we've set the page counts. So if I refresh my screen here, I should have descriptions with page counts. So 8 pages, 2 pages, 2 pages. And again, so this is a 2-page document of hipster speak. If you need to generate ipsilon ipsum, this is a good way to go. So that's it for the PDF example. Then I wanted to put in, I'm like, well, those are a couple of good examples, but just some general metadata operations. I mean, like creation of folders and documents. So I provide kind of a grab bag of this. And we use, for these last 2 other examples, we use CMIS queries. But then I was like, well, we want to provide some other ways you might do this. So we're going to traverse, rather painfully in this first example, from the root down to the actual folder we want, just by using get children. And I provide the code for that. There's also another way to get the data we could have used, just get by path. And I provide an example of that in the code as well, so you have both ways to go about it. But basically, we're going to get a folder in a child document, read some values, update metadata, and then we're going to delete the document. This is split into 4A and 4B because if I delete the document before you see it, then did it ever exist? So I will do both examples separately. So in our example, we're just targeting document library, the root folder of my Summit site, and then we're going to add a folder to that. And then underneath that folder, we're going to add a document. And like I said, there's 2 ways to do this. We could get child nodes, which is what we're going to do here, and look for the node we want. We're looking by name in this case. You can also get it by path, which I provide both. So here's my two examples. So I could just have done get by path here. But I've created like a helper method basically to get children of a given node. One thing I want to mention, I'm passing an operation context. Basically that lets you kind of filter down what you want back. This is another one where we could probably spend 40 minutes just talking about operation context. But basically the thing to know is it's important, it can help reduce the amount of overhead by reducing what you get back. And it's in the code here as an example, so you have that to look at. Then we're actually we have a helper method to create a subfolder, just of type CMIS folder. And if You could actually change this to anything that has CMIS folder as a parent if you wanted to, but we're using the out-of-the-box library. We're just setting the name on it, and then we get back the target folder. We return the target folder because we want to actually use that again because we want to add a document to it. So this is us adding a document, and I create I use the default, like the content stream implementation that's provided by OpenCMIS for this. My file is actually just a hard-coded string. It could be a file that you created as a stream, but I'm just using a text string. Then we set properties on this. The one thing interesting on this, when you create a document, you can tell it what versioning state you want. So I've said major, so I want it to be created as 1.0. And then we actually are going to do an update. So I'm creating it as a certain name, and I'm going to try to update the name to updated name. So we should see a couple of things happen in the repository. We should see the name, when we actually go look at it, be updated name. The version number should not be 1.0 at this point. It should be 1.1 because we've updated it. And the last thing we'll do in the demonstration is basically run through and delete all the nodes that we created. So we create basically a hash map. There's a new concept of secondary object type IDs, which is basically a list. I'm using an array list here of all the aspects. So what I do in my code, I actually updated my code more than what's on the slide. I return back the current aspects that have been applied to this piece of content, and then I add the systemporary aspect to that, and we set the property, and then we delete it, and then it's gone. It doesn't go to the trash can because we have systemporary on it. It's gone forever. So let's go run this real quick. So I'm going to go up in my repository here. So there's no CMIS folder here. I'm going to go back to my client. So I'm creating, I'm looking at a site, Summit 2014. I'm creating a folder called CMIS folder. I'm creating a document named CMIS created document, and then the document content is this is truly awesome content, and that'll be in my document. It'll be of type plain text. So notice here, notice here, the version is 1.1. So when I go look at this, let me refresh here. I've created my CMIS folder. Now it says updated name because I've actually updated the document. But we look back at the version history. You see that? Yep. It was originally created as CMIS created document for 1.0, and then I updated it with updated name to 1.1. Now I'm going to delete this. Maybe. There we go. If I go to my trash can, I should see it in my trash can because I did not, this is the one where we did not add systemporary when we deleted it. So let's go to my trash can so you can see it there. So I'm going to go ahead and empty this. I'm going to go back and run my other example, which is going to do the same thing basically, but then go through the process of deleting the document. You can see it actually outputs all the currently applied aspects on this object, and then actually deletes it. So let's go in there real quick and look at the metadata operations. Come on, mouse. There's one important thing in here I wanted to show you. Once I've updated the document, when I want it again, I'm actually calling get object of latest version, and I'm passing it the Boolean false. The false basically means give me sort of the latest and greatest version out there. If you set it to true, it'll give you the last major version. So if I'm on 1.3 and you say true, it'll give me 1.0, which can be useful, but in this case, we just want the latest and greatest because we're acting on that. In my cleanup method, you can see down here, a cleanup block of code, I guess. This is where we add the aspect ID. And we're actually adding it to a set of aspects. I guess it would be bad form to just step on the existing aspects, but we're deleting it anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. But just to be nice about it, I'm gonna add it instead of just replacing it. So let's run this real quick. So there's nothing in the trash can. And there's nothing here. So you have to kind of take my word for it, but then it really happened. But it did. My logs prove it. Hang on. That's to prove the absence of something. But so you can see I'm deleting the folder and document. Now, I can't. I guess technically it doesn't prove anything, but there we go. But we do. So we actually, I use quite a bit in my day-to-day existence. Like we avoid the trash can a lot of times. Like we don't want to go through the double-step process of deleting something and then cleaning the trash can. So I use systemporary a lot for transient data that we just want to get rid of. So this is kind of actually a helpful example. But you can see it bypassed the trash can. Adding the aspect worked. The code, the syntax of the code has changed some for CMIS 1.1. I find it to be a lot easier to deal with the secondary object IDs. I'm running, looks like I'm running a little short on time, I think, but I got 4 minutes. All right, we got time for Python. I didn't want to make you guys go through all of this in Python. 5 minutes, thank you. But I wanted to provide an example. And I said Python 2xx, it should be like 2.6x or greater, not 3, but I'm using 2.7.8. So there is in addition to Open CMIS, there's also CMIS lib, and they're both on Apache Chemistry. And another cool library that I couldn't find in PyPy, but you can download it, is CMIS lib Alfresco extension, and it actually adds support for aspects. So I actually downloaded that and then just did a local install using easy install. So my example actually uses both those libraries because we're just adding an aspect to the document. So let me demonstrate that. So I'm importing, the top import is the extension library, and then I'm importing CMIS client. And this is a real simplistic example, but I'm doing the same query. I'm just selecting star from looking for documents of type ipsum, and then I connect to the repository. So I'm basically getting the default repository back at the bottom there, and then I'm walking the nodes in the repository, key values, making a query and finding nodes, and then this is sort of like the Homer Simpson, bed goes up, bed goes down. If it doesn't have the aspect, I add it. If it has the aspect, I take it away. And that's all it does. But it shows you, demonstrates removing and adding an aspect, so it's a useful example. So let me see if this will run. So it claims to have added the aspect, right? So all my hipster documents have the aspect added. I can actually think I can prove this one, though. So let's try that out. So there's systemporary. Now I'm going to run it again. Oops, maybe. Probably should just hit F5. Now it found the aspect, so instead of adding it, it's just removing it. Can you all see down there? Sorry. So let me refresh, and it is gone. So it's not, I don't have as many examples for Python as I do for Java, but I think once you get the patterns down, the concepts are the same. But I wanted to provide some example code. I like Python, so I wanted to provide a Python example. I'll have to leave .NET and others for another day. So that's basically it for our examples. I want to thank you for attending today. I find this technology really fun to work with. I've found the more I play with it, the more uses I find for it. And I hope, I really would love you to take the code and try it out. You don't need a custom model. Probably best if you have Alfresco 4.2, so you can use the 1.1 bindings. And all my stuff is against the base model. I mean, there's no reason why you can't take it and point it at like a custom model that you have, as long as it has CM content or CM folder as a parent. The code is not up yet. I have the slides are up on the Summit site, but I plan to upload that either today or tomorrow. I'm kind of adding comments and stuff to it some more, and I'm going to go ahead and upload it as a zip. You should be able to import it into Eclipse and run it. I have some resources. the Oasis site, Apache Chemistry site, and I provided the URL for the extension library for CMIS lib. It's in Google Code. Like I said, it didn't show up when I tried to find it in PyPy. I don't know why, but it wasn't there. And basically, I told you guys I would run you right up against the end of the time. But thank you for attending. Again, the zip will be on there. My email is right here. They'll be in the slides. If you download them off the website, it's a PDF, and so you can see it right there. Our general informational address at Bluefish Group is info@bluefishgroup.com. But if you want to contact me directly, I'll be here. And I'll be here tonight and tomorrow if you guys want to come up and talk to me. I'd love to talk to you guys. I think that's it. You had a quick question?
Yeah. Are you aware if there's any mapper from CMIS to Bojo? A little bit like ORMs, instead of coding the mapping between your CMIS object and your Bojo?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not aware. Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm not sure. I think that's all we have time for. Anything else? We've got a couple seconds. Let's go.
You showed Java and Python. Have you also worked with the CMIS.NET?
I haven't used the .NET library. That was on my goal list to do. Yeah. I know there's some open source applications that are using it now. I think CMIS Sync is using it.
Potentially related is CMIS 1.1, where the better handling of aspects via secondary object IDs comes into play.
Yeah.
With 1.0,
it's messier. Yeah. And I I'm not 100% on this, but I don't think the .NET library supports 1.1 yet. Not yet. Not yet. Yeah.
That's key.
Yeah. Because the CMIS lib does not either. So, I mean the CMIS lib for Python is 1.0 still.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.